down to the last minute details.
Mid!
Super Smash Bros. Has always been very dear to my heart. I think I made that clear when I pitched a crossover with a long-forgotten series of games. But it's still a franchise that I love to enjoy, whether it's watching Smash Bros. Content on YouTube or casually playing it myself. Personally, I've never liked playing competitively, so my enjoyment mainly came from other options like Classic or Adventure Mode. And of all the Adventure modes, my absolute favorite was always the Subspace Emissary from Super Smash Bros. Brawl. In my opinion, World of Light doesn't hold a candle to the Subspace Emissary, and there are many reasons why I say this. One reason being that this mode actually tells a fun and engaging story. It utilizes the game's iconic characters and inserts them in a completely different narrative, where we get to see these characters develop and interact with each other as they work together to stop a brand new evil. But my absolute favorite thing about this campaign was the fact that it has its own assortment of unique enemies you would fight throughout the game. And when I say that, you're probably thinking, oh, they probably just use existing enemies from various franchises like Mario or Zelda. No, almost every enemy in this mode has their own original design and moveset. You could definitely tell that some enemies have details that are inspired by other Nintendo games, but overall these enemies are completely new, not just Smash, but to the entirety of Nintendo in general. This enemy system was the main reason I love this adventure mode so much, because personally I always thought the enemies in video games were highly underrated. From my perspective, I don't see them being focused on as much as other popular aspects of video games like the gameplay, story, artwork, music. Honestly, if they implemented a similar enemy system into World of Light, it could have been on the same level as the Subspace Emissary. They don't even have to create more original enemies. I would have been fine if they did what I said before of using enemies from other Nintendo games. But getting back on track, today I decided to rank every single enemy in the Subspace Emissary. And what better way to do that than with a tier list? I will be covering these in no particular order. I'll be ranking each enemy based on their design and their moveset. S obviously means amazing, while F is total garbage. Not much else to say than that, so without further ado, let us begin. The first enemy on our list is the Pyramid. These guys are basically the standard troops of the Subspace Army, essentially cannon fodder for the player to mow down as they make their way through the journey. The design itself is fairly basic, but I think it's a very unique design compared to other quote-unquote grunt enemies. Their moveset is also very interesting, as they use moves that essentially allow them to act like other Smash fighters, like smash attacks or rapid jabs. Additionally, like most common soldier enemies, Pyramids have several variations of each other, whether it's them being equipped with a certain item, or having undergone some sort of transformation. There's big Pyramids, metal Pyramids, fire Pyramids, and there's Pyramids equipped with weapons like swords, super scopes, or boomerangs. Side note, the phrase boom pyramid is very misleading in this context, because when you first hear that name, you expect an enemy that explodes when it gets near you, or an enemy that throws bombs, or some sort of explosive projectile. But no, it's just that the boom is short for boomerang. I'm putting the pyramid in B tier. I think this is a very interesting design for the base enemies you fight against, and I love that they have all sorts of moves and variations for this enemy. As for the variations, they're mostly going to hover around B or C tier. Scope Pyramid, Metal Pyramid, Big Pyramid, I'll put in C. Their attacks are fairly basic, they don't really add anything. Sword Pyramid and Fire Pyramid, I'll put on the same tier, because both of them have completely unique movesets. Fire Pyramid can shoot fireballs or breathe fire from its mouth, or from its mouth area. The Sword Pyramids can do combos with their swords. But as for the Boom Pyramid, I'm putting in C tier, mainly for the mislead. You might think that's cheap, but to be blunt, this is my list, I can do whatever I want. Next enemy on our list is the Spack, or Spock, I don't know how else to say it. These enemies are battery charged clouds, using electricity to battle its opponents. They have two phases. First, they always spawn as a white cloud, and in this form, they fire little balls of electricity at the player, but they take pretty much any damage at all. They enter their second phase, where they turn into a black storm cloud. In this form, they deal much stronger lightning bolts that deal a lot of damage and knock back to the fighter. Like the Pyramid, Spocks are also fairly common enemies, and despite the complexity of their moveset, they're generally very easy to defeat. Which makes sense, given that these guys are introduced right at the beginning alongside the Pyramids as the first enemies you fight, and they also function as the first airborne enemies you fight in the game. I'm placing the Spack in the B tier as well. Much like with the Pyramid, I like its design for its simplicity and uniqueness. Next up, we have the Greep, and right off the bat, I'm placing this guy in the S tier for the design alone. The Greep is a large and fashionable pot, with wheels and a tiny little red head with eyes. Oh, and don't forget the humongous scythe arms. This guy is the perfect mix of adorable and terrifying. It reminds me a lot of the Scarfies from the Kirby franchise, an enemy that starts off cute and adorable and later turns into a monstrosity. Funnily enough, I could see the Grape being some sort of enemy in a Kirby game, and despite its noticeable features, the Grape only has 2 moves. Its standard attack is just swinging its size at the player. While powerful, this attack leaves itself exposed for a moment as it struggles to get its size out of the ground. This leaves an opportunity for the player to attack its head, which is its weak spot. While it is possible to damage the Grape's head while it's not attacking, it's not exactly advisable, because if you try to get any sort of height advantage over it, it will start using its second attack, or it will jump and spin its size in a circular motion, dealing tons of damage and knockback. I really like this enemy. The Grape is quite challenging to beat. I would consider it to be the first mini-boss enemy you encounter. And the design is awesome. It's the perfect mix of cuteness and terror. S tier. Next is the Bucculus. This looks to be a very short plant-like enemy with enormous red lips and a purple sac on its back. Lips appear to be barbed or spiky in appearance, which makes sense considering how this enemy attacks. Bucculus mainly attack with the element of surprise, as they start off being buried in the ground, the only part of them visible being their giant red lips. And once a player gets near it, it will pop up and latch onto the player by kissing them for an extended period of time. This attack continuously deals damage to the player, and all they can do is button mash to get it off faster. Once the Bucculus is broken away, they are left vulnerable for a couple seconds as they bounce on the ground. If they are not killed in that time, they will burrow back in the ground, where the player will have to coax them out again in order to defeat them. Fun fact, if you kill a Bucculus while its purple sac is big enough, it has a high chance of dropping a maximum tomato. I always found this enemy to be very annoying. Back then, when I was playing Brawl, I was a very inexperienced Smash player. So much so that I don't think I used my shield more than once throughout the entire campaign. So while I did have a rough time fighting most enemies, the Bucculus was always the most irritating one for me. I'm placing it at C tier. Yes, it's mainly due to my bias, but also the design, while unique, doesn't do that much for me. It's pretty much a pouty Venus flytrap. Next is the Fayish. It's some sort of fish creature with tentacles and a giant eye. By the way, today I learned that the reason why it's called the Fayish is because the word fish has an I, like EYE. I literally found out about this while I was writing this script. I've always pronounced it as Fayish, but due to this revelation, should I just be saying fish, or is it Fayish? But back to the enemy itself. It only has one move. It will attack with the tentacles, dealing knockback and electric damage. The attack is fairly weak, but because of this, you will definitely fight these guys in groups. I'm also putting this guy in the C tier. The design is original, but also very basic. The moveset is very one note, and the name, while somewhat clever, doesn't really add anything. Up next, we have the Auroras. That's hard to pronounce. These guys are bird-like enemies with red dots for eyes and a giant beak. You'll mainly encounter Aurorases when they're hovering over a single area or when a flock of them are flying above you. Once you get near them, it'll try to attack you by diving straight towards the ground with its beak, after which it will be vulnerable, trying to get its beak unstuck from the ground. At this point, you can either attack them normally, or you have the option to pick them up and use them as an item to throw at enemies. I really like the aspect of using them as an item, and their design is quite unique and colorful. I would say B tier. Up next, we have the Poppet. Now this is a unique enemy, both in terms of design and behavior. It's some sort of doll creature with lots of gifts in its, I guess, trousers. But the main thing about Poppets is that they will always try to run from you, throwing back various objects that can potentially hit you. If you manage to defeat one, it will drop various items, mostly healing items like food, probably to compensate for all the damage you've taken. I like that it kind of serves as the loot enemy archetype, and I think the design is very cute and adorable. It's not a particularly fascinating enemy for me, so I'm putting it in B tier once again, which is still pretty decent. Next we have the Shell Pod. It looks like some sort of stag beetle creature. Its noticeable features being its prominent horn and the eyes, which you can see through the shell. Shell pods only have one attack. They will attempt to impale you by thrusting forward with its horn. However, if they take enough damage, their shell will eventually break open, revealing itself to be some banana-shaped turtle creature. They also let out this wail, which I always found hilarious. From this point on, the shell pod will still attempt its same move, but all it can do is push you back some distance. Fun fact, it is possible to KO them while they're still in their shell. I have done it before. I think you just have to hit them with a really strong attack, while their shell is so close to being broken. I always found a shell pod to be a funny and intriguing enemy. I thought the shell form was interesting, but pretty basic. But more specifically, I always thought the shell pod in its naked form was hilarious due to its cry and its further attempts to damage the player. Overall, give it a B tier. Next up, we have the Flow. It appears to be a ghost-like enemy with red eyes. Its form made entirely out of small rectangles. The Flow's only attack is letting out a bellowing scream that deals a decent amount of damage and knockback. Additionally, they can also regenerate health when they take damage. However, they cannot move while they're in this process. On their own, they're fairly easy to take out, but you'll most likely be fighting them in groups where they're more of a nuisance. I love the polygonal aesthetic they have. The design reminds me a lot of Super Paper Mario, where the design and characters have a more dimensional feel to them. This is enough for me to put the Flow at A tier. Next up is, in my opinion, a very iconic enemy of the campaign, the Road Turret. It is an automated stationary turret with a skull face in the middle and two large cannons by its sides. Given that the name is basically the words rotate and turret together, the Road Turret is able to rotate 360 degrees in order to fire its cannons at the player. Another thing to mention is that there's a big arrow that points in the direction it's firing. While this enemy may look intimidating, it's actually fairly easy to beat. Road turrets will always fire in bursts, therefore it's best to attack it in between the periods where it's not firing. Any damage taken will stun the Road Turret, rendering it unable to attack. I've always loved everything about this enemy. The skull face, the arrow, the barrage of bullets it fires at you, and I guess Nintendo thought so too, because it came back at Smash 4 and as a Spirit Ultimate. With all this in mind, I think it's safe to say that the Road Turret belongs in the S tier. Next we have the Trowlon. It's some sort of pink, bird-like creature with a flat, paper-like body. It also possesses a large beak and two red eyes. Unlike other enemies, Trowlons will not attempt to attack you directly, most of the time. Instead, it'll try to sweep under you and carry you upwards to the top of the screen and into the blast zone, where you'll obviously get KO'd. It also will sometimes damage you if it manages to hit you with its beak during this process. I love the concept of these guys and how they attack. I know I've been praising most of these enemies for their uniqueness, but this is a truly unique enemy based on its attack patterns. I am putting the Trowlon at 8. Next up we have the Bomb Bed. It's another doll-like creature with, as the name implies, a bomb for a head. Side note, I've always pronounced the name as Bomb Bed, but then I thought maybe we're supposed to pronounce it as, the word bombed. But then I double checked on the wiki and yes, I was right from the beginning. We're supposed to pronounce it as Bomb Bed, like bomb head. But back to the enemy, Bomb Beds attack by throwing their bomb heads at players. Once a Bomb Bed first spots you, it will light its fuse and start to slowly back away until it throws its bomb head at you. It will then flee in the opposite direction until it generates a new head, at which point the process repeats itself, until you kill it of course. I remember these guys being very annoying. Again, I don't think I shielded or dodged even once when I was playing, which made these guys even more of a nuisance. I don't think these guys are as annoying as the Buckless, and I like the Bomb Bed's design, so I have to say I put this in the B tier. Next up is the Ticket. It's basically a giant mechanical chicken. These are fairly common enemies to fight, and they can be a bit of a pain to deal with if you don't know their moveset. Tickens have two moves. Their standard attack is that they will charge forward with its spiky crest, attempting to ram the player. Their second attack is an aerial move. It will fly into the air and slam down on a player with its body, which has the potential to bury them into the ground. Another unique detail about this enemy: most of the time when you defeat an enemy in a Subspace Emissary, it will send them flying and potentially bouncing all around the stage until it goes off screen, hits an enemy, or just disappears. Apparently this process is referred to as careening by the Smash Wiki. In the case of the Ticken, however, they do not careen upon defeat. Instead, the Ticken's body will be completely destroyed, which reveals a tiny yellow chick to be piloting the entire thing. I think this enemy is really great, from its moveset, its design, and especially the creative defeat animation. I also love imagining Taboo gathering a flock of chicks to assemble his mechanical chicken army. I'm placing it in the A tier. Next up is the Armite. It appears to be a squid-like creature with a handlebar mustache. According to the wiki, they are apparently ammonites, which are an extinct species of cephalopod, and most resemble octopuses or squids. The most identifiable thing about this enemy is its entrance, for it will enter the stage from the background while letting out a thundering. Apart from its interesting design and vibrant laugh, its moveset is more complex. I can tell you from experience that these guys can be really tough and annoying to deal with, especially if you never press the shield button. Armites have 2 attacks, one for close range and one for far distances. Armites will mainly try to attack you up close with a sword combo, where it will slice its opponents 3 times with both of its swords. If you're a considerable distance away from it, it may use its range attack, where it will throw both of its swords at you, then unsheath 2 new ones right after. To me, this enemy is iconic. I always found their laugh to be hilarious, and despite the difficulty I had fighting them, this enemy will forever be one of my favorites. I'm tempted to put this guy in the S tier, so I will. Next up we have the Tao Tao. Tao Taos are large ram-like creatures that when first encountered will always be sleeping with a cute and relaxed expression on its face. However, if any harm comes to it, or any loud noises made near them, it will instantly change to a more wrathful and scary appearance, while letting out booming roars like a lion. Now I did say that the Greep reminded me of the Scarface from Kirby, but this enemy's behavior is virtually identical to Scarface. From first glance, you would think that this was an actual enemy in the Kirby franchise. Considering its moveset, it has 2 main attacks. Once awakened, the Tao Tao will try to charge at the player, dealing massive damage and knockback. Additionally, if the player is too close to the Tao Tao, it will attempt to bite them, which also deals a considerable amount of damage. Periodically while in this state, the Tao Tao will let out large bursts of electricity, dealing extra damage. Eventually the Tao Tao will go back to sleep if left alone. Just like with the Armite, this enemy is another one of my favorites, although these guys are also very annoying to fight sometimes. From its absolute adorableness in the sleeping state to its rage and fierceness while awake, there is so much to appreciate about this enemy. I'm also putting it in S tier. Moving on, we have the Rotor. This enemy is basically the wheelie from Kirby but edgy. Their moveset is actually a bit more complex than most enemies. Once a Rotor spots a player, they will charge forward and attempt to ram into them. Rotors have incredible speed, and even possess a jump attack that they can use to get over gaps. Another interesting detail is that when a Rotor is defeated, it will explode, launching its wheel in the same careening process as most of the enemies. I like that such a simple enemy was given a more complex moveset. Apart from that, however, there's not much else to say than that. I do really like the design though, so I'll place it in the B tier. Next up is the Borborus. I keep pronouncing it as Boroboros, like Ouroboros, because I keep thinking there's an extra O in there. Boroboruses are humanoid enemies with a large trumpet-like head. These guys act more like obstacles, as they will continuously blow wind towards the player, pushing them away and potentially into gaps and other hazards. While they don't try to physically attack the player, they can deal damage to them if they're near the enemy's head right before they start blowing wind. Another interesting detail, when left alone, Boroboruses will prance and skip around as music notes surround them, though no actual music is produced. This is a pretty basic but unique enemy. I like its indirect method of attacking, along with its other quirks. Overall, I'd say B tier. Up next, we have the Puppet, with an I instead of E. As the name so subtly hints to us, the Puppet is a marionette suspended from strings. However, up close you can see that these guys possess claws. Puppets will hover around the stage and will try to attack the player with its claw swipes. It also has a second attack, where they will fire a laser from their eyes towards the player. These are fairly common enemies that can be very annoying to deal with, especially in groups. Puppets have pretty low health, however, so as long as you don't get swarmed, these guys should be a piece of cake. When I first saw this enemy, I immediately thought of Zelda. You can clearly see attributes from previous Zelda games like Twilight Princess are present in this enemy. I also found the puppet's animation to be very creative, especially with its entrance, where they entered by being dropped down by whatever's controlling them, then being adjusted accordingly to fight the player. Overall, I think the puppet is a fascinating and well-crafted enemy. A tier. Next up, we have the Bitan. These guys are basically sentient ball creatures with a large red eye and a sharp-toothed grin. Bitans also come in several different colors, 9 to be exact. Bitans only have one attack. They will roll and charge forward at the player, dealing damage and knockback. However, their primary trait is that they have the ability to duplicate themselves by shooting more Bitans through their eye. You'll definitely be fighting Bitans in groups, where they're more handily equipped to cause you irritation by continuously attacking you and creating more clones of themselves. Lastly, there are also giant versions of Bitans. However, they won't duplicate themselves as much as the normal ones, which is definitely for the best. I think these guys are pretty basic. Their design doesn't do too much for me, and they were certainly a pain to deal with in the campaign, although I do appreciate their skill set, and I like that they come in different colors and sizes. So I'd say they just about make it in B tier. Next up, we have the Mites. These guys are just tiny little stick figures with the Subspace Army emblem as their heads, and come in red, yellow, and green. Much like the Pyramids, Mites will also kind of act like Smash Fighters. and will do all sorts of punches and kicks, much like most standard fighters do in battle. And much like the Bytans, mites will almost certainly fight you in hordes, where they'll try to overwhelm you with their attacks. And they're made even more annoying in that they're harder to hit due to their small stature. Again, these guys were painfully annoying to deal with in the campaign. Unfortunately, there's not much to say about their design. They're just stick figures. Really, the only thing about their design that's unique is the Subspace Army emblem as their head. But unfortunately, even with all of that, the might's gonna have to go in C tier. Next we got the Bucket. It's basically a robot with arms and a propeller that hovers in the air carrying buckets full of molten material. While in the air, Buckets will try to dump the piping hot metal onto the player. There's not much else to say than that. Again, a very basic enemy. Moveset is one note, design is not doing that much for me. C tier. Now this is gonna be a go one. Next we have the Shados. It appears to be some sort of humanoid creature made up of shadow bugs, which are the material that pyramids are made of. The Shados seems to possess 2 heads, as well as a glowing red orb in the center. And of course, the most prominent detail about it is its 2 ginormous blades on each arm. As you can probably infer from its appearance, Shadoses have a very elaborate moveset. Shadoses have 2 standard moves, a light and heavy attack. For their light, they will swipe their blades at the player twice, dealing a fair amount of damage. For their heavy, they will extend their blades, preparing to deliver the blow, then slash down at the player, dealing a considerable amount of damage. Much like the arm might, they will often try to combo with these moves, usually doing light attacks to start, then end with a heavy. You probably couldn't tell from the design, the only way to damage them is to hit its pink orb, and the best time to do it is when they're about to deliver their heavy attack. The state in which they're about to deliver their heavy blow is when their orb is completely exposed. Additionally, Shadoses can also spin and hover around the stage, making it harder to hit their orbs, and easier for them to maneuver and try to get hit on you. So yeah, immediate S tier. I love everything about this enemy. The design is so detailed and creative, it's almost enigmatic in a way. Like, why does this enemy have 2 heads? Do they control 1 arm each? And the moveset is so stacked and intricate, it makes these guys formidable opponents. I do remember having a tough time fighting these guys, but unlike other enemies, I never felt too annoyed. I think it's because I understood these guys were meant to be intimidating. So yeah, amazing enemy. Up next is the Nagagog. These guys are doll-like creatures with the stature of a sumo wrestler. Their attacks are fairly straightforward. They will run towards you and attempt to perform a belly flop on the player. If they're near a player, they will send their fist on the ground towards them. They even have an aerial attack where they can perform a somersault off the ground. Their main gimmick, however, is their ability to increase their size. Nagagogs will always spawn in its tiny blue form, where it starts off with an ample amount of health. After sustaining a certain amount of damage, Nagagogs will start their transformation process, and they will grow into its larger yellow form. And after taking more damage, it will transform one last time into its largest red form. As you can probably guess, the larger a Nagagog grows, the more damage they do, but they also attack slower as a result. Keep in mind that Nagagogs are invincible while they're in the middle of their growing process, and it is possible for them to go straight to their red form if they take a considerable amount of damage. It is also possible to defeat them without ever letting them transform, as long as you keep overwhelming them with constant damage. But overall, I like this enemy. The design doesn't do too much for me, but I think their abilities and attacks are very unique and creative. So I'll place them at A tier. Next up is the Psy-Mole. It's a metal robotic sphere with blue eyes and 4 blade-like appendages. These guys act more like hazards, as you'll see them hovering around platforms or over gaps, or just blocking your way in general. If you get too close to one, Psy-Moles will spin their blades, trapping the player for a brief moment until they eventually launch them away. Another detail that I actually didn't know before was that Psy-Moles can reflect projectiles. I think it's because I always just melee these guys, so I didn't really see the point in shooting them. But regardless, that appears to be it for the Psy-Mole. I don't really have anything noteworthy to say about this enemy. It's certainly a unique design, but overall, meh, C tier. Next up is essentially a 3-in-1. We have the Glunder, Flyer, and Glice. They are basically the same enemies, just with different types of damage: thunder, fire, and ice. These are tire-shaped enemies with a large eye in the center. Its body divided into 3 parts. According to the wiki, the reason why these enemies have the GL prefix is because it's derived from the word glare, referencing their eyes in the centers. Like the Psy-Mole, these enemies will also act as hazards, as they will continuously roll along any type of surface, such as walls, ceilings, platforms, and other types of surfaces. When Glunders, Flyers, or Glices get near a player, they will release a burst of electric, fire, or ice damage, briefly trapping the player, or in the case of the Glice, instantly freezing them, eventually launching the player away. Again, not much else to say about these enemies. They have different variants of each other, which is somewhat interesting. Other than that, these guys are just living tires. I'm putting all 3 of them at C tier. Next up, we have various Mario enemies. We got the Goomba, Koopa Troopa, Hammer Bro, Paratroopa, Bullet Bill, and Giant Goomba. Now this may appall most of you, but I'm placing all of them in the F tier. Now this is not me saying that these enemy designs and abilities are terrible. These enemies are iconic across not just the Mario franchise, but to Nintendo as a whole. I'm mainly grading these based on originality. And Nintendo is basically just reusing these enemies for its campaign. While that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's not what I'm looking for in this tier list, because we're already familiar with these guys. I want enemies that are completely unique in terms of design and abilities. As much as it pains me to say, these guys are going at the bottom of the tier list. In a similar vein, we have the Rob Squad. These guys are obviously based on Rob, who was introduced in Brawl, and they're very similar to Primids, as they're common units that they'll fight throughout the campaign, and they have multiple variants of each other. The first and most common variant is the Rob Sentry, where they pretty much just attack you with their arms. Next is the Rob Blaster, a variant that fires laser beams at the player and also has the ability to hover into the air. Finally, there's the Rob Launcher, a green stationary variant that fires homing missiles at the player. Not much else to say than that. I'm putting the Rob Sentry at F tier. Not only is it unoriginal, but the moveset is very bland. Rob Blaster, I'll put it in D tier. I like that it utilizes some of Rob's moves like his Robo Beam and Robo Burner. Finally, I would say the Rob Launcher is my favorite variant. The move is definitely derived from Snake's remote missile ability, but I do really like the design. I think the green color is a nice choice, and I like the detail of the Rob's face just being a barrel to launch rockets. I'll put it in the C tier. Now this next one is pretty unusual. Here we have the Mizzo. It looks to be a blue red-eyed ball-shaped enemy with arms and legs. This is an unused enemy. You'll never encounter this guy in battle. Its only appearance is in one level, where you can see it displayed among various other enemies in some sort of containment room. In addition, you can see that it's attached to what looks to be tentacles. According to the wiki, the Mizzo was meant to be an aquatic enemy, where you would encounter them near bodies of water. However, the Mizzo would later be cut completely as an enemy from the game. I do wonder what the Mizzo would be like in combat, how it would fight you while in the water. With the design alone, I would say it's decent, but again, I can only get it so far. I was thinking maybe C or D tier. I'll be gratuitous and place it in C. Next we have the Jick. This is not really an enemy, it's more of a hazard, because you can't defeat these guys. These guys have no health, they basically are traps that surround, platforms or surfaces, or just block your way in general. The design is original, so I guess I'll put it in C. Now these last three, I'm gonna group them together, because right off the bat, I'm saying that all three of these enemies are S tier. So let's go through them one by one. First up, we have the Auto Lance. These enemies are mechanical robots that move on threads, similar to a tank. More notably, they wear some sort of knight helmet to serve as armor. The player can knock off the helmet to reveal its head, also serving as its weak spot, which is some sort of emergency siren light. If you couldn't tell from its name, the Auto Lance attacks with its lance, or lances, but we'll get to that later. Much like with the Armite and Shados, Auto Lances have a very well-stacked moveset. They will mostly attack up close with their lances, either by using a single powerful thrust or an upward slash. Auto Lances also have a ranged attack, as they can launch multiple lances from distance at the player. I remember these guys being a pain to fight, but I've always considered them to be one of my favorite enemies to battle. I thought the design was very cool and almost adorable in a way, and all those reasons are why the Auto Lance belongs in the S tier. Our second to last enemy, we have the Armank. It seems to be a large armored tank-like vehicle moving on treads, similar to the Auto Lance. Its more prominent feature is its humongous robotic arm that resembles a crane. Their name is very fitting in this context, given that it's just the words arm and tank together. Finally, the whole thing seems to be piloted by a green blob with red eyes, what looks similar to Kirby. Just a heads up, this enemy might possess the most complicated moveset out of the entire Subspace army. To start, Armanks are entirely immune to damage when the vehicle is close. On top of that, while their movement is slow, due to their size, they can deal damage just by moving into the player. Eventually, it will extend its giant crane-like arm to attack them. In this state, Armanks have 3 attacks they can execute. They can quickly extend the arm towards the player as a sort of battering weapon, dealing large amounts of damage and knockback. If the player is within close range, Armanks can use their arm to sweep the ground, performing a spin attack to deal damage. Finally, their arm can fire 3 electric balls at the player as a ranged attack. Armanks will constantly rotate between moving on its treads and attacking with its arm. The only way to damage it is to destroy its arm, which will explode after taking a certain amount of damage, after which the vehicle is forced open, revealing the green blob. The player will only have a limited amount of time to attack the Armank. If they are not defeated in that amount of time, it will close its shell, repeating the same process as before. Again, this is redundant, but I love everything about this enemy. The amazing design, the intricate moveset, etc, etc. You'll encounter very few of these enemies due to their difficulty, but for me personally, that only makes it more exciting to fight these guys. Instant S tier. And finally, our last enemy is the Gamiga. It appears to be a living work of art. more specifically some sort of sculpture with several layers and a large multicolored doll-like head. Now right off the bat, I want to say that I absolutely adore this design. Its art style is not only detailed, but it's so unusual and kind of creepy. As its trophy description states, the Gamaga will constantly stare at the screen, never blinking, unless hit. The yellow bases of the Gamaga also seem to possess eyes, a mouth, and 2 arms on its side. While the design is very artistic, its moveset is relatively simple. Gamagas will always spawn buried in the ground, and will pop up when a player gets near them, after which the head will attack the player by firing 3 homing lasers from its eyes towards them. The bases have no attacks. Their only purpose is to block the player and provide a height advantage for the head to attack. Fun fact, when the head takes any sort of damage, their eyes spin like they're part of a slot machine. Now the traditional method of tackling these guys is just destroy the bases, so that you have better access to the head. However, that method leaves you open for the head to fire its lasers at you. A much easier approach would be to just focus on the head entirely, because the head cannot attack if it takes any damage. While this may require you to constantly be airborne while fighting them, it's much more efficient as its bases will also be destroyed when the head is defeated. I can't explain why, but the Gamaga was always my absolute favorite enemy from this campaign. You would think that enemies like the Autolance and Armank would be my absolute favorite due to their awesome design and complex moveset, but I just really like the concept and appearance of this enemy, despite it only having 1 attack. It might just be my appreciation of the art style, I don't know, but the Gamaga is going to the very top of the list. And with that, that is all the enemies of the Subspace Emissary. I hope you all enjoyed this much more casual video. I wanted to make something that required a lot less effort after that documentary of a video I made a few months ago, which by the way, a huge thanks to everyone who watched that video. I worked really hard on it, and it was so encouraging to see so many positive comments and feedback, as well as some constructive criticism. Honestly, I wasn't expecting that video to get 1,000 views, and now it's almost at 8K. Also managed to grow this channel to 55 subscribers, which is amazing. I hope that all of you watching continue to stick around, as I've got so many video ideas and I want to make a reality soon. So, to end this off, wherever the future of Smash Bros goes, I hope Nintendo doesn't let amazing storytelling and combat systems like this die. The Subspace Emissary is highly underrated, and I want Nintendo to make some sort of remaster or re-release of this in their newer consoles. But since it's highly unlikely they'll do that, it's up to us to make sure classics like these never die, which might be a little harder to do nowadays. But regardless, thank you for watching, and I hope you continue to stick around, because I have some exciting ideas that I really want to share with you guys.